Welcome back to RamyWorks 360. In this video, we're going to be using Masterbox Under Fire set in 1/35 scale. It includes 4 modern US soldiers posed in the middle of a casualty situation. Right out of the box, the figures already tell a compelling story, but I wanted to push it even further by giving them a realistic environment to fight in. Instead of placing them on a flat base, I decided to build a small Middle Eastern compound wall to make it feel like they're taking cover while treating a wounded teammate. I started with a piece of insulation foam and used a hot wire cutter to cut everything down to size. The walls were intentionally simple. In a real combat situation, soldiers aren't looking for the perfect position, they're looking for the closest cover they can find. Once the pieces fit together, I glued everything into place and let the adhesive set before moving on. While the base dried, I shifted over to the figures. Every figure starts the same way, a black primer followed by a white zenithal highlight. The zenithal highlight gives a roadmap for the lighting, making it much easier to build contrast once the paint starts going on. Since these are meant to represent a more elite unit, I painted them in a multicam pattern rather than the older universal camouflage pattern. Multicam has become the standard across much of the US Army because it performs well in a wide range of environments, from deserts to woodland terrain. Now, instead of trying to paint every tiny shape exactly like how the real fabric, I focus on capturing the overall look. At 1/35 scale, convincing color and contrast are more important than copying every detail. I start with the lightest base color and slowly build the camouflage layer by layer. Each color adds just another piece of the pattern, and as always, less is more. It's easy to overdo camouflage at this scale. One thing I really enjoy about building modern military figures is that these aren't just random uniforms to me. I spent 10 years in the Army, so I've actually worn very similar gear to this. Before Multicam, the Army used the Universal Camouflage Pattern, or UCP. If you've ever seen those gray digital uniforms from Iraq, that's what they were. The problem was they didn't perform particularly well in many environments. Whether you're in the mountains of Afghanistan, the forests back home, or the deserts of Iraq, they tended to stand out more than they blended in. Right around 2010, soldiers deploying to Afghanistan started receiving Multicam because it proved much more effective in the terrain. It broke up the outline of the soldiers much better and worked surprisingly well across different environments. Eventually, the Army adopted what we now know as the Operational Camouflage Pattern, or OCP. At first glance, it looks almost identical to Multicam, and most people can't even tell the difference. There are subtle differences in the color palette and pattern, but for 1/35 scale figure, Multicam captures the overall appearance extremely well. When painting camouflage this small, I found it's better to focus on the overall effect rather than trying to copy every single shape exactly. If every blotch is perfectly accurate but oversized, it actually looks less convincing. Keeping the shapes small and letting your eyes blend the colors together from a normal viewing distance creates a much more realistic result. For the skin, I decided to experiment a little bit with beige red. It wasn't exactly the result I was hoping for, but that's part of the hobby. Every project teaches you something, and sometimes finding out what doesn't work is just as valuable as finding out what does. One thing I changed from my previous builds was the equipment. Rather than making everything multicam, I painted much of the kit flat earth to represent higher-end aftermarket gear. Special operations soldiers often mix equipment from different manufacturers, so having different shades of tan and green helps break up the figures and give them a more realistic appearance. Once the figures were finished, it was time to bring the environment to life. I spread AK dry ground over the entire base using a plastic knife first. Then I came back with a flat brush to create texture. Now, even though most of it will eventually be covered with paint and pigments, the texture underneath is what sells the realism. After everything cured, I primed the entire base before spraying another zenithal highlight. Now, just like the figures, building the colors gradually creates much more depth than trying to achieve it in just one coat. For the ground, I used Vallejo's modern desert color set, starting with the darkest shade and working my way toward the lightest. I slowly built up the color transitions. Rather than completely covering each previous layer, I let bits of each color remain visible. That's what creates natural variation across the terrain. To bring out all the texture, I dry brush the walls with a lighter color, allowing the raised areas to catch the paint while leaving the recessed areas darker. Finally, I tied everything together using Vallejo pigments. European earth was worked into the base of the walls to create deeper shadows. While desert dust was brushed across the tops of the walls and open ground to represent years of windblown dust collecting on every surface. With both the figures and the base complete, all that was left was putting the story together. Combat isn't always about charging forward. Sometimes it's about holding your ground long enough to save the man next to you. Every soldier has a job. One lays down suppressive fire, another keeps watch, one fights to stay alive, and the medic has only minutes to make the difference. This is what I love most about military dioramas. They're more than just painted figures. They capture moments. Moments that happened. Moments that could have happened. Moments that remind us that behind every uniform is another human being. In combat, equipment matters. Training matters. But at the end of the day, people fight for the person standing beside them. That's what it's all about. That's what it's always been about. The guy fighting next to you, your brother in arms. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this build, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what modern military scene you'd like me to build next. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you in the next build.